Welcome once again to my online class. Dear students of intermediate class, we are talking about right form of verbs, and today you are going to learn about a very interesting item of grammar, that is cases where passive or active is not allowed. Dear students, there are some verbs which do not take an object, and we have to use those verbs in active voice. Passive is not allowed there. And there are also some verbs which are to be used in active always. We should not use them in passive sentences. And today we will know about these things of grammar, and I will try to explain the whole thing through details examples. So let's give me some examples. Examples. I am writing here some sentences. Notice carefully. They arrived home late at night. This is example number 1. Then example number 2. Celia was running so fast. Example number 3. Did you sleep well? Or example number 4. Mr. John died last night. Example number 5. A quarrel ensued at this. A quarrel ensued at this. Example number 6. The fog dispersed. Okay, let's stop here. Then you know that well, these 6 sentences are in active voice. What is happening here? Dear students, do you know what is a transitive verb? As in our previous class, we learned that verbs may be of different types, and transitive verb and intransitive verb. This is one of such types of verbs. So, an intransitive verb is that verb which doesn't take an object, and the verb which doesn't take an object cannot be used in passive, as they do not take an object, and they are called intransitive verb. I have used 6 intransitive verbs here. Because in none of these 6 sentences we are getting any object, no object. You know, subject, English is an SVO language. It is said frequently that English is an SVO language. That is, in English basic structure, subject comes first, S for subject, and then V, verb, and then O for object. So, subject, verb, object. This is the basic structure of English. But we do not get any object here. That is, we are getting here only SV. That is, they. This is the subject, and arrived is the verb. And home late at night, this is not object. So, in this sentence, we are getting no object, and arrive is an intransitive verb. Intransitive verb, you know, intransitive. Arrive, as it has taken, arrive doesn't take an object, and that is why arrive is called an intransitive verb, and it should not be used in passive. Example number 2, Celia was running so fast. Celia is subject, was running is main verb, so fast, it's not object. So, run has no object. It is again a intransitive verb, run. So, arrive and run are intransitive verbs. They belong to the same group of verbs, same type of verb. Anyway, did you sleep well? This is an interrogative sentence. Sleep is the verb here and no object here. Did you? This is the subject, and we have used this dummy auxiliary here just to make the interrogative sentence. And well, this is not object, you know. So, sleep is an intransitive verb as it doesn't take object. So, sleep, the verb, cannot be used in passive. And then Mr. John died last night. Mr. John is the subject and died last night. Died is intransitive verb. It doesn't take any object. Last night is an adverbial. It is not an object. So, we should not use died in passive form. I mean, if you write Mr. John was died, if you write in this way, Mr. John was died last night, this is a wrong sentence. Was died, that is, you have made passive, was died, because what is the basic feature or the main feature of passive sentence structure? The basic feature of the structure of passive sentence is that we have to use always, no exception is there. Passive means the past participle form of main verb is a must. In all the passive sentences, we have to use the past participle form of main verbs, always past participle form of main verbs, and before that an auxiliary is a must. So, an auxiliary verb plus the past participle form of main verb. This is the rule for the basic structure of the passive sentence. Sometimes auxiliary in a passive sentence can be silent, can be understood, can be remained absent, but indirectly passive auxiliaries are there, and we can understand that there is an auxiliary verb. So, the general rule for passive structure is that we must use an auxiliary verb, and then we have to use the past participle form of main verb. So, if you use this die in this way, this is certainly a passive sentence, but you should not use die in passive. So, you should not use here was. We frequently make this mistake, dear students. So, be careful. Or then again, in all these cases, such is the case, Now, you can say that yes, was here is auxiliary, and then this is present participle, because here run I haven't used here the past participle form of main verbs, but present participle. So, it is not passive. And then Mr. A quarrel ensued at this, ensue. You know, ensue means this is the word ensue, ensue. The correct pronunciation is ensue means befall, happen, occur, etc. So, a quarrel ensued at this. Ensue is such a verb which does not take an object, that is, this is an intransitive verb. So, if you, that is, a quarrel ensued at this, it means a quarrel took place at this. So, if you use this in passive, it will be wrong. That is, if you use a quarrel, I am sorry, a quarrel was, a quarrel, if you write was ensued, it is a wrong sentence, because you have again made passive, but ensue is an intransitive verb because it does not take an object, and that is why you should not use it in the passive. And then the fog dispersed, again we are getting what, and this is an intransitive verb because it does not have any object. So, the fog dispersed, that is, there is no fog, the fog gone. Now, if you use this in this way, was dispersed, this is wrong, because if you use was or any other auxiliary verb before the past participle form of dispersed, then it will become passive. But the rule is that intransitive verb cannot be used in the passive. There are many other such intransitive verbs. For example, we have getting here arrive, run, sleep, die, ensue, disperse, and such verbs. There are many other verbs such as occur, then belong or consist, wonder, and there are many other intransitive verbs. You have to practice and try to learn these intransitive verbs, and remember that intransitive verb does not take an object, and that is why they cannot be used in the passive. This is rule number 1. So, what is the first rule? In intransitive as a verb, in the case of intransitive verb, we should not use the passive form. And I am again writing some sentences here on the board. Notice carefully. Example number 1. Unfortunately, Friday doesn't suit me. Unfortunately, Friday doesn't suit me. Example number 2. Nora has 2 brothers. Example number 3. Does this bag belong to you? These are the 3 sentences I have written. Notice, unfortunately, Friday doesn't suit me. Nora has 2 brothers. Has. Does this bag belong to you? So, we are getting here 3 verbs: suit, has, and belong. These are called state verbs. Another types of verbs. We discussed state verbs and action verbs in our previous class, and then I told you that I would discuss in details state verbs in my future class, and that future which I indicated in my previous class, this future is the today's class. So, I promise to discuss the state verbs in details. So, these three verbs are state verbs, and there are many other state verbs. The opposite is action verbs. So, should, then had or have, when means out, has or have may have more than one meanings, and when has or have mean out, and then belong, and there are many other verbs such as appear, disappear, resemble, lack, etc. Okay, these are called state verbs. There are many other state verbs, and I wrote as many as 30 plus state verbs on the board in my previous class. So, there are certain state verbs, not all the state verbs, which cannot be used in the passive, but they are to be used in active. Certain state verbs, as I said in my previous class, that state verbs express some states or conditions which are relatively static. Static means stationary, set, fixed. They do not have tendency to be changed. They are unchanging, as I have written some of the verbs here. So, this type of state verbs, they include the verb of perception, the verb of senses, the verbs of cognition, the verbs of emotion, and the state of beings, as we discussed all these in our previous class. So, I am not going to discuss this in details today. That is the nature, the feature of state verbs. My concern is here just to explain that some of the state verbs, certain of the state verbs cannot be used in the passive. This is my concern today. So, we haven't used passive sentence here. Unfortunately, Friday doesn't suit me. This is an active voice, because suit is a state verb. If you make this sentence, unfortunately Friday is not suited, then it is wrong, because you have made passive here. Because as we have already said, the main feature of passive structure is that we have to use an auxiliary verb, and then that auxiliary verb is followed by the past participle form of main verb. So, it is not allowed, that is passive is not allowed here. Nora has two brothers, has. If you transform this sentence into passive and you make this two brothers are had by me, you should not do this. That is, if you use has or have in the passive voice, the sentence is not correct. Then does this bag belong to you? This is an interrogative sentence, and belong is such a state verb which is not allowed in the passive. So, you should not use belong in the passive form. So, rule number 2 is that there are certain state verbs which cannot be used in the passive, and that is why the title of our discussion today is cases where passive is not allowed. So, we have got two cases where we should not use passive, in the case of transitive verb and in the case of certain state verbs. And then we are going to discuss where active is not allowed, that is where almost exclusively we are to use the passive, and I will discuss only one case, only one of such case where we are to use almost exclusively the passive form where active is not allowed. Let me write some examples. Number 1, Shakespeare was born in 1564. Number 1. Number 2, when the water is shipped, we will send you a confirmation email. Number 3, the area is mainly populated by the families with small children. Number 4, the victims were hospitalized immediately. Number 5, the room was strewn with books and magazines. Okay, let's stop here. I have written 5 examples here. What are those 5 examples? Shakespeare was born in 1564. This is no doubt a passive sentence because was born, be verb plus past participle form of main verbs, be, bear, born, born. So this is a passive sentence, and in the case of bear we are to use the past form always, almost exclusively. We should not use bear when the water is shipped, we will send you a confirmation email. Is shipped. So, ship means embark. You send parcel, and there you find the use of ship. That is, when the water is shipped, this passive form is auxiliary verb plus past participle form of main verbs. Then the area is mainly is, that is be verb plus populated. So passive voice. The area is mainly populated by the families with small children. Populated means full of people. That is opposite of desert. Then victims were hospitalized immediately. Were hospitalized. Notice hospitalized, populated, shipped, born. And then the room was, the victims were hospitalized means the victims were maybe the victims of the accident were admitted to the hospital for treatment. So, were hospitalized immediately, and then the room was strewn with books and magazines. Was strewn. Strewn means stew means spread or scattered something untidily over an area or over the surface. This is called strewn. The room was strewn with books and magazines. So, strewn here, the past participle form of stew. So, we are getting these verbs here: born, sheep, that is bear, sheep, populate, hospitalize, and stew. And there are some other verbs which we are to use almost exclusively in passive voice, where active is not allowed. So, there are some verbs which are to use in passive voice always, and there are some verbs which are to active voice always. You should remember all these verbs so that you can use correct form of verbs to produce correct sentences in your practical life. Thank you very much. See you, hope, in the next class.